So, today we're going to be talking about the Book of Obsidian. I've had a chance to read it and I'm just going to share my perspective. So, just to get right into it, I would say that this book is a insightful and interesting secular analysis of what is going on in the Black dating market. Now, the reason I use secular is because unlike many other relationship books that I've read, especially those that are focused to women, this doesn't say anything about God or spirituality. It doesn't offer any religious formulas or any prayers or anything like that, to help anyone find their perfect partner. Really, what it is just a man sharing his perspective and providing different facts and data and statistics to back it up. So in that sense, I found it really interesting because I've never read a book like that. And also I've never read a book that is literally dedicated just to Black men, like a relationship book that is dedicated to Black men. And I found that to be really invaluable. And so here are a few things that I actually really loved about the book. First, he starts off the book by addressing what he calls the Black love machine. Now, what this is basically the Black and dating market, right? And really what he does is basically try to expose some of the hypocrisy that exists within this space. Because unfortunately, there are people out there who really are just trying to pander, especially to women. And what happens is that Obsidian, he starts to address some of the different naysayers or people who say, hey, you Obsidian, you've never been married, you don't have any kids, you've been single your entire life, you're not in a long-term relationship. What do you know about being a dating expert? What he does to address those naysayers is basically look at some of the other leading experts in the Black love machine space and expose that many of those people themselves either aren't in relationships, or they're divorced, or they've had affairs, or they're not even married to people, they're not married to other Black people. And so he basically shows that, like, hey, no criteria exists within the Black dating love market. So because no criteria exists, therefore I am totally qualified to be this dating expert. And so I thought it was funny just because, not only does it kind of expose, some of the issues and some of the pandering that happens within the community. I just thought the way he framed that, I just thought it was funny. And so I found that part of the book enjoyable. Another thing I like about the book is just the studies. And I mentioned this in another review I did about him, where he provides really good studies and data on things that I've never heard about. Like, for example, he really goes deep into why short men, believe it or not, are the best husbands when it comes to them being loyal, them being faithful, them providing the most money, them helping around the house. Like, there was all these data and statistics behind why short men tend to be better husbands. And so I found that really insightful, because where else would I hear that? I just don't hear that, Another thing he talked about was, weight, a person's size, and how that can either impact them or negatively or positively in relationship space and, in the careers and just the overall lifestyle. And so I thought that was data that I had never seen before that I found to be really interesting. Then another one he talked about that I found interesting was when he was looking at singleness among Black women, especially as they get older, and how that impacts them economically, and how that essentially impacts the economy. And again, these are just different references that I in my, in the different years that I've read relationship books, I had just never heard that stuff addressed. And the reason I thought that was so cool was because, again, if you're trying to solve a problem or, actually assess what's going on, then you actually have to assess what's going on. Like, you actually have to look at what's happening in people's lives. And I thought some of those different stats or just reports really did a good idea of trying to get a general sense of the market. Another thing that I thought he did a really good job of, although it definitely got me in my feelings, I'm not even gonna lie, was this chapter called Victim Queen. And basically what he does is address some of the different ideologies that, as a Black woman I've heard that are contradictory. For example, one that says, okay, we need to be strong, single, independent, take care of ourselves, we don't need men, all that kind of stuff. But then there's another token, we're saying, okay, well, we're the most unprotected, Black men don't want to marry us, we're most discriminated against, we don't get paid as much. So it's like, wait, so how are you strong and independent and you're outpacing men, but then you need men and you're unprotected? Like, how can it be both at the same time? And so that chapter is really dedicated to kind of addressing some of the different hypocrisy, really, that we have heard, Black women have heard. And the reason I found that interesting was because it does exist. Like, it does exist. And I'm like, I don't really know of many spaces where that can be talked about and addressed. And so, yeah, I found that to be really, really interesting. It did get me a little bit in my feelings. So, like I said, I love being a Black woman, and you know, whoever likes being critiqued. But some of the stuff, I looking at the stuff and I'm like, this is valid. I can't disqualify it because this is valid. And so I think that was one point he made that was really good. Another thing that he also addressed in that chapter was this idea of the Black sisterhood. And this probably goes back to my earlier point where there exists this certain culture where it's as if women and even Black women can't be criticized or critiqued of certain things. And that can be detrimental when things that they are doing are actually causing damage. And so he talked about the Black sisterhood, right, which is this unspoken rule that, like, no matter what, you're supposed to side with the sisterhood, even if the sisterhood is wrong. And so that's one thing that he addressed that I felt like, you know what, he's right. I've seen this. And while this may not be true in everyone's like life, I'm not saying this is true in every situation. Certainly, like as far as it's concerned in like media and things are portrayed like online, things like that. Yeah, it's you can't really critique any aspect of Black women without being considered misogynoir. And so I do think he did a good job at addressing that. Now, there were a few things about the book that either I just didn't understand or I just didn't totally agree. And so one aspect of the book where I didn't agree was where he was talking about, pro-Blackness or building the community. And what he basically does is look at the different leaders in this space who have used their Blackness, right, pro-Blackness or building the community to essentially get into women's pants to try to get money. And that certainly does happen. Yes, it does. But what he does at the end of the chapter is basically say, therefore, building the community or being pro-Black, it hasn't really led to anything. Now, the reason I just don't agree with that is because it was people who were fighting for the Black community, for the advancement of the Black community, or being pro-Black. Those people are the reason that we are at where we are today. Like, if it wasn't for people in slavery fighting against being enslaved, the Martin Delaney's, the Harriet Tubman, like Nat Turner, if it wasn't for people fighting and waging warfare, if it wasn't for people in Jim Crow who were fighting to try to get more rights, if it wasn't, people fighting in the civil rights movement, like every point of history for Black Americans, there has been a struggle to get any sense of rights. And so to act as if being pro-Black or trying to build the community hasn't gotten anywhere when it was literally those people fighting that got us where we are today, I just think that's a misreading of history. Now, I do understand that there have been a lot of bad actors who have used their ideologies to try to, just to try to get ahead. But that exists in all spaces. I mean, we can literally look at, the people who established this nation. We can look at Benjamin Franklin. We can look at George Washington. We can look at them and critique them just as well and see that they did many things also that were not right, that were damaging. And so I guess I didn't understand why there was such a harsh critique on those who were actually actively trying to build the community, when those people who did build the community are where we are at today. And without them, we wouldn't even have some of the rights that we have. So that's one thing I just didn't really agree. Another thing that, to me, I don't understand, and like I said, I don't know if I'm missing something, but it just doesn't make sense to me, is where Obsidian, he has made very clear that he is not trying to build nobody's community, especially when building the community consists of women who want to be with Pookie and Ray Ray. He's made that super clear. So clear. So because he's made it clear he does not want to build the community, I'm like, how then can you position yourself as the dating coach, right, for Black men in the community? How can you now say, okay, I'm going to help build Black men in dating and relationships when you are not for the community? I guess it doesn't make any sense to me. And I think the primary reason is, and for me, in order to be like for a community or, for a particular people group, you want to actually ensure that people group continues to exist. And the ideology that he promotes, as far as I can understand, it certainly promotes that, hey, Black men, you should take care of yourself, you should live your best life, you should have fun, which I'm all for. You should take care of yourself. But because there's not necessarily a willingness or a push for these Black men to try to find ways to, to have families or try to find ways to make the best of the situation, if you will, by building community, because they are encouraged to leave the community and have fun, therefore, it's like those black men are going to exist. Because if everyone was to take the position that Obsidian take, which was to be single, to be a bachelor, to not have kids, cool. But if you're not having kids, then you're not having kids. And therefore, black men, the everyday black men, are not being created because they're not being born, because there's not families where those kids are being born. And so I guess I don't understand how you can be pro a community if you're not promoting any ideology or any, I guess, recommendations that aren't going to ensure that that community continues to exist. And that is one thing to me that just does not make sense. Now, if it's all about telling black men to, live their best life and just have fun, I'm like, cool, okay, that makes sense. But then should you really say that you are like, building a community of black men if the very thing that you are promoting is not going to ensure that those black men exist 2, 3, 4, 5 generations on the line? So I guess that's just one thing, honestly, that I didn't understand or just didn't make sense to me, because I'm like, this very ideology, every black man did it, they're not going to exist 4 generations from now. They'll have fun. They may have fun on the way to their grave, but there's not going to be anyone after them. So that's just one thing, like I said, that just didn't make sense to me. I'm like, I don't know how can you be pro and against the community at the same time, but also not make sure that the community exists. So I don't know. Those are just one thing that didn't make sense to me. But all in all, I found the book to be very insightful. I mean, it created a lot of conversation between me and my husband. Like I said, there is just a ton of stats in there and just things that I had never considered. And to be perfectly honest, it really did make me think. It really gave me, I think, a perspective and a lot more compassion for the different things that men go through, like that I never even thought about, like men being stood up, men being used for their money, like all these different things. I'm like, oh gosh, this is horrible. And so I really feel like, although there were times where I'm like, this was a really harsh critique and I didn't want to hear it, I'm like trying to put myself in their shoes and being like, you know what, man, like this sucks. And I guess I was appreciative for hearing some of those things, because like I said, I think I can walk away now and have a little more compassion and also be like, look, you know what, there are situations where women do need to be held accountable and women do need to own their actions and do better and recognize how they are also creating maybe some of the damage that they feel like they're receiving. And so I feel like it definitely made me think, and I also feel like it gave me a good insight into how many men feel. Now, I know Obsidian isn't necessarily representative of all men, but there are a large portion of men who do share his sentiments. And in that sense, it made me, I feel like it was invaluable. It gave me some insight into how people feel, into what they're going through, and I feel like that alone is invaluable. So, yeah, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think. Have you read the book? Have you not read the book? I'd love to hear from you. Leave your questions, comments, concerns in the comment section below. Thank you so much for listening if you've gotten this far, and we'll talk later. Bye.